Welcome back to another Zero Context Patreon. Stark advertising my Patreon content one out of context zero moment at a time. I finished up the last few chapters of Almost Beautiful before breezing through the second book of the Zodiac series, Wandering Star. Then I started Maze Runner for the remainder of the month. I thought about what prison would be like for her, that maybe she would end up hating me anyway, and it would all be for nothing. Yeah, here's the thing. Divorcing Abby isn't going to magically absolve her of any sort of responsibility after the fact. She helped Travis to flee and actively lied to the police about where they both were. My mom wasn't always a bad mother, but she was never a good one. The house was never quite clean, the breakfast not always on the table before school. The problem is that literally none of those make her a really awful mother. My mother wasn't always a bad mother, but she was never a good one. The house was never quite clean, the breakfast not always on the table before school. She didn't always come home at night, and she wasn't always sober. And there it is. You should have led with that. I'm Agent Val Tabler. This is Agent Joel Marks. Can we come inside and speak with you for a moment? What if they were there to arrest him and last night was their last night together? If they were going to arrest Travis, they wouldn't have asked politely if they could come talk to him and then gotten comfortable on the sofa. Use your freaking brain, moron. Informants get paid. Well, and we've taken care of your backstory for Abby. We're rerouting any calls to your hotel or the convention center. We've created content if she Googles the convention. So this doesn't have anything to do about introducing a Brandon trying to get with Abby subplot. I mean, maybe it does have something to do with Brandon, but as long as Abby doesn't get dragged into this, I kind of care a lot less. I was hoping St. Thomas would be a good way to start over, but Travis seemed to be in a dark place. I don't know who needs to hear this, but getting married, having a vow renewal isn't going to magically fix things if you do literally nothing to actually initiate that do-over. We popped over to the hardware store and I made a simple shelf. Albie set the urn on the center and decorated each side with the small flower vases and seemed to feel okay with it. But I wasn't sure if she was ready for what we were about to walk into. Boomfest was Eastern State's lesser version of Coachella. The girls wore sparkling, skimpy outfits, wild makeup that usually included glitter or those fake gems stuck to the faces. The guys had it easier, typically in Baja hats or fedoras and Hawaiian shirts. The tone shift between these two paragraphs is so freaking hilarious. I'd been coming to Member X 1206 for 2 weeks, combing through House Capricorn's memories of the Trinity Axis, searching for answers to any of my millions of questions. I'm desperate for any sense that could lead me to Orochimaru to help us defeat Marat or bring back hope to the Zodiac. I said this a lot during the first book, and I feel like I'm going to keep saying this as I read through the rest of the series. I seriously don't know why she gives a hoot when it's obvious that nobody cares about her. The way that they turn her into a martyr when things didn't go their way at the end of the first book is evidence of that. Herds of black-robed Capricorn make their way there with us, each holding what looks like a magic wand. It's their wave-like device, it's soothsayer. I still don't understand why every single planet has to have their own special snowflake cell phone. Like, it's a phone! They all work the same! This is the equivalent of, oh no, I don't have an iPhone, I have an Android. But worse, because inertia has to stop to explain to us every freaking time. The truth is, it's not Satin's fault or even Dad's. It's mine for following her orders. Maybe they would have said something if I'd ever given them an opening, but I wanted too much to prove myself to Mom. To show her she was right to invest so much time in me, to make her love me as much as she loved my brother. This is somehow worse than Stan acknowledging that he shouldn't have allowed their mom to do that garbage to his little sister. The idea that she's still under their mother's abuse and thinks that if she simply tries harder, then Mummy will somehow come back and love her again. Even after everything that's happened, you never actually proved Orochimaru's existence. It's not so much what our girl is saying here, it's more like, why the hell has she not learned to keep her goddamn mouth shut? It's like you're here, but you're not here. You've had this wall up since last month, and it makes you unreachable. It literally has been a month since Matt died. Of course she's still grieving. Jeez, give her some breathing room. I survey the other house leaders, and they stare at me with wide eyes. As I look into their faces, I am paralyzed with dread. I was expecting Zodai, military leaders, adults, not teenagers. I'd like to remind you that the grown-ups threw you under the bus when duty hit the fan. The teens were always on your side. Joel and we'd gone on a midnight swim. I feel myself going red too. On Cancer, midnight swim is where a couple gets together for the first time. Since we can't bring our significant others back to our parents' house, it usually happens at night in or near the Cancer Sea. The way that I'd rather die than openly admit to my sister that I was being intimate with my girlfriend when a bombing occurred. I don't want to keep running away from myself, I press on. Mateus is gone. While the words cut me, the blade doesn't dig as deep anymore. He can no longer be my excuse to stay stuck. I don't think he'd like that. Or is the dead horse here to say it's okay to grieve when somebody you love dies? Yes, it's important to not push your other loved ones away, but you also have to be kind to yourself in the heat of your grief. I hate that memory. If it were a snow globe, I'd smash it. What a bizarre thing to say. The zodiac is too fractured to be unified, and the house system is on the verge of collapse. A new order must rise. First, we will get rid of the guardians and the last remnants of the old and outdated civilization. We are a book and a half into this series, and the author has yet to make me understand why we shouldn't be supporting them. Their system does suck, and most of it is their terrible leadership. The mass, the brainwashing, the ruthlessness of the attacks are all unbalanced risers. The master found himself a whole army of sociopaths. I wouldn't really say that. These are people that society chewed up and spat out. Apparently more than once of what Rose said about the risers in previous chapters true. All the master needed to do was to tell them that they could have peace and no longer have to hide. To be fair, this is the same kind of cult tactics that people like Pumpkin Spice Palpatine use to gain followers. Regardless of his ability to actually go forward with his promises, it's enough to gain followers. In response, I punch her again, this time landing on her nose, and I feel the brittle brown crack. A patch of skin is slayed off where I struck her, as if it's made of actual dried-out Levian. The Marad's advanced technology and special suits hide her inferior makeup. Imbalanced risers have the highest number of diseases and deformities of everyone in the Zodiac. Please explain this to me like I've never encountered your species before. How does literally any of this make sense? A disease that impacts only people whose genetic makeup is so weak that it keeps shifting? What the hell is happening here? Matthias's words won't leave my head. He's not upset with me. He doesn't blame me. He's just replaced me. He has a bond with Pandora I can't come between. I don't have a place in his life anymore. He's not my guy, and he's definitely not my boyfriend, so where does that leave us when Equinox touches down? I'm sorry, but the dude was kidnapped and tortured because of his relationship with you. She's touched in the head if she thinks that Matt is simply going to come out of this without a heavy mental toll. You must have been 8 when the stars promoted me to chief executive, so you wouldn't be aware of the scandal it caused, she says. She says scandal as if it's something that's good for business. I'm the first guardian of riser parentage. No one else listens to them, and they don't have a true home in the Zodiac. When I ascended, I think they were happy to know there was someone in power who sympathized with them. Yeah, it's great that there is somebody who's listening to them, but at the same time, I can sit down and listen to the trials of black people all that I want, but it's still not my lived experience since I'm white. Until they have a riser guardian, then I feel like things are only going to get worse and worse. Well, it's not so much the leadership position, but rather the way that all 12 planets continue to treat risers. Things aren't going to get better so long as people continue to treat risers like garbage. This was Vasily's childhood home, says Arcadia when we've exited the car. We stand in front of the cabin, looking up at it somberly. It looks like a rotting animal carcass. Its lawn overgrown, the ceiling partly caved, the paint flaking off the walls. Why hasn't it been torn down? Arcadia runs a hand through her short, silky locks. Then we would forget. And yet you're letting it rot and nature overtake it. Look, there are ways to remember the past without letting the building disintegrate. I once visited Dachau. It was a place where some of the worst crimes happened, but it's still being maintained so that we won't forget. But this whole time you've been too scared to let yourself fall in love with me. I hoped your feelings would grow stronger than your fears, but they haven't. I have been rooting for Hassan because I feel like Matt is too old for Ro, but holy guacamole on toast, dude. His actions in this book have been making me reconsider. He's been pushing her and pushing her to make a decision, even when she was being swallowed by her grief over Matt's death. Like, you do understand how you were the villain in this relationship, right? That you're the toxic problem, right? It means you only spent the night with me because we were about to die, but in a world with a tomorrow, I'm not even an option, he says in a flat tone. Even if I did everything right, it would never be enough. You will always choose a Cancerian over me. I'm sorry, but his timing couldn't possibly be worse. I've been saying that he's been pushing her to choose while they're in the middle of this horrible war, and that he's completely terrible for forcing her to do that. But after what happened with Argyle, wow, next level terrible. In theory, you're in line, but you have a long way to go before you're really thinking with an open mind. I wish you luck with that. I'm sorry, but you don't get to say and do all of this nonsense and somehow act like you're the morally superior one here. On Gemini, every new set of guardians has carte blanche to imagine a new government. In Acolyte studies, we learned that last century Ruby and Cassie ran their house as a dictatorship. He took charge of Hearthgar, and she ruled over Argar. But this century, they opted for democracy. Do you think it's good to keep reinventing the Geminin government over and over again? Here's the thing, the entire world is watching in real time why we can't keep one government around for too long. The system becomes corrupt and full of scary and dangerous ideals. At this point, maybe America should take cues from Gemini. Thomas is obviously quite overwhelmed with everything. Not only does he not remember anything, but to top it off, the boys buzzing around him are speaking in some sort of slang that's lost to him. He blames his memory loss, but I'm honestly having a difficult time following along with it, if I'm being honest. You just called it a maze. You said same thing happens out in the maze. Chuck's face reddened. I'm done with you. I'm done. He walked back towards the tree they just left. I think the worst thing about this is how every single boy doesn't display a single ounce of empathy. They were once in Thomas's position. They'd been shoved into this strange place with zero memory except for their name. They were once clueless. Yet they're acting like it's a total pain to have to explain basic things to Thomas, like, yeah, we're at the center of a huge murder maze. Suddenly the glade, the walls, the maze, it all seemed familiar, comfortable. A warmth of calmness spread through his chest, and for the first time since he'd found himself there, he didn't feel like the glade was the worst place in the universe. He still felt his eyes widen, his breathing stopped for a long moment. What just happened, he thought. Ironically, the feeling that things would be okay made him slightly uneasy, not quite understanding how. He knew what he needed to do. He didn't get it. The feeling, the epiphany, was a strange one, foreign and familiar at the same time, but it felt right. I want to be one of those guys that goes out there, he said out loud, not knowing if Chuck was still awake inside the maze. Or, as I like to call this, the author wrote himself into a corner and needed to push Thomas into the actual plot. Ugh, what kind of terrible writing is this? Why do they need a graveyard in a place full of teenagers? Really? You're seriously going to ask that even after finding out that you're at the center of a maze that's full of murder robots? Chuck, what if we're all criminals? I mean, what if we're all murderers or something? Huh? Chuck looked up at him as if he were a crazy person. Where did that happy thought come from? Think about it. Our memories are wiped. We live inside of a place that seems to have no way out, surrounded by bloodthirsty monster guards. Doesn't that sound like a prison to you? Let's entertain this thought for 2 seconds here. If the entire point was simply to get these people, these literal children, away from society, why go through the trouble to remove their memories and dump them into an elaborate murder maze? It seems like it would be faster and cheaper to simply shoot them in the head and be done with it. When he's gone, Meaninghouse starts his shit talk Thomas. I don't fucking care. I'm so over how little that these boys care about one another. Join my Patreon as a free member to access all of the same amazing content you love on Tumblr. However, for only $1 a month, you can join my Patreon and unlock all the month's book snark as well as early access to my free daily snark. I'll see you next month, guys.